My parents disowned me at my 25th birthday. My birth family was 3 tables away. My name is Nora Ellison, and I am 31 years old. 6 years ago, my adoptive mother stood up at my birthday dinner, tapped her wine glass, and told everyone at the table that she was done. Done with me. Done pretending. Done calling me her daughter. 32 people watched her do it. The restaurant went silent the way restaurants only go silent when something real and irreversible happens inside them. What she did not know, what neither of my adoptive parents knew, was that 3 tables behind them, a woman named Ruth was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, watching everything. Ruth had my eyes, my exact eyes, the kind of detail you notice immediately when you are not looking for it and cannot unsee once you are. Ruth was my birth mother, and she had been sitting in that restaurant for 40 minutes before my adoptive mother said a single word. Before I take you back to the beginning, please hit like and subscribe if you are new here. Drop your city and the time it is where you are in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the night everything I thought I knew about my own life came apart and put itself back together in the same hour. I was adopted at 3 days old. I did not know this until I was 17. My adoptive parents, Glenn and Sandra Ellison, raised me in Crestwood, Ohio. Nice house. Good schools. Glenn was a civil engineer. Sandra ran a home staging business and served on the board of 3 local charities. They were respected people. The kind of couple other couples looked at across church parking lots and felt quietly inadequate around. I was their only child. For most of my childhood, I believed that meant I was chosen, treasured, the center of everything. And in many ways I was. Sandra threw birthday parties that other mothers photographed. Glenn coached my soccer team for 4 seasons even though he had never played soccer in his life. They showed up. They provided. By every measurable standard, they were good parents. But there was a temperature in that house that I could never name when I was small. A precision to their love that felt more like performance than feeling. The way Sandra hugged me was always the right length. Never too long, never too short. Like she had read the correct amount in a parenting book and practiced it. I told myself I was imagining it. I stopped telling myself that the summer I turned 17. I found the documents in a filing cabinet in Glenn's office. I was looking for my Social Security card for a summer job application. Behind a tab labeled Household was a manila envelope with my name on it in handwriting I did not recognize. Inside was my original birth certificate. A different last name where mine should have been. A different mother's name entirely, Ruth Okafor. I sat on the floor of that office for 22 minutes. I counted. Not because I was devastated, because I was trying to understand why a fact this large had been kept from me this long. I put the envelope back exactly where I found it. I got the job. I said nothing. For 8 years, I said nothing. Not because I was afraid, because I was watching. And what I saw over those 8 years told me everything I needed to know about why the truth had been kept from me. Glenn and Sandra did not talk about hard things. They managed them. When money got tight after the recession, Sandra redecorated 2 rooms and told the neighbors they were renovating. When Glenn's mother died, the funeral was handled like a catering event. Efficient, appropriate, over by noon. Nobody cried at the reception because nobody wanted to be the one who made it uncomfortable. Feelings were fine as long as they stayed inside the lines. I did not stay inside the lines. I was loud when something moved me. I laughed at the wrong volume. I asked questions that had no polite answers. I majored in social work at Ohio State instead of business administration. I brought home friends from every background imaginable and expected them to be welcomed at the dinner table. Sandra managed all of it. Glenn deferred to Sandra on everything that involved me, which was everything. By the time I was 22, I understood the temperature in that house. It was not coldness exactly, it was control. Sandra loved me the way people love things they have arranged carefully. And I had stopped being arrangeable somewhere around age 14. The first time I searched for Ruth Okafor, I was 23. I typed the name into a public records database at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night, sitting on the floor of my apartment in Columbus with a cup of cold tea beside me. She appeared in 4 minutes. Ruth Okafor, née Mensa, 48 years old, resided in Dayton, Ohio, 83 miles from where I was sitting. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed. I opened it again the next morning. It took me 4 months to contact her. I wrote 17 drafts of the same email. Too formal, too casual, too desperate, too distant, too much like someone who needed something, too much like someone who needed nothing. I deleted 15 of them. The 16th I kept but never sent. The 17th I sent at 6:47 in the morning before I could talk myself out of it. Ruth replied in 40 minutes. Her email was 2 paragraphs. The first paragraph said she had been hoping to hear from me for years. The second paragraph said she understood completely if I needed time and that there was no pressure, no agenda. Only that she wanted me to know the door was open whenever I was ready. That was it. No demands, no explanation yet, no performance. I called her that same evening. We talked for 3 hours and 14 minutes. I know because my phone showed the duration when we finally said goodbye. She had a voice like warm wood, steady, unhurried. She asked more questions than she answered. She laughed easily. She did not try to explain away the first 23 years or fast forward through them to get to something more comfortable. By the end of the call, I understood 2 things clearly. First, Ruth Okafor was not a stranger. She was someone I recognized in a way I had never been able to explain about anyone else in my life. Second, I had kept a secret from my adoptive parents for 8 years. I was about to keep a bigger one. If you have ever found something out about your own life that changed the way every previous memory looked, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me because I think more people carry this than anyone admits. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do it now because this story is about to turn. Over the next 18 months, Ruth and I built something carefully. We met for coffee in Dayton 4 times before it started feeling less like a meeting and more like a visit. I met her sister Abena, who made jollof rice that made me embarrassingly emotional the first time I tasted it. I met Ruth's husband Bernard, a quiet man who restored antique clocks and greeted me at the door the 3rd time I came over, as though I had always been expected. I met Ruth's other children, my half-siblings, 2 of them. Kofi, who was 20 and studying architecture. Amara, who was 16 and had my exact same laugh. The first time I heard Amara laugh across a room, I stopped moving completely. Ruth noticed. She put her hand on my arm and said nothing. She understood. I told no one in Crestwood, not because I was ashamed, because I had watched Sandra manage things my entire life, and I knew exactly what would happen the moment she found out. She would make it about her. She would reframe it. She would find a way to position herself as the person who had sacrificed the most. And by the time she was finished, the conversation would be about her feelings and my ingratitude, and the whole complicated, beautiful, terrifying thing I was building with Ruth would become collateral damage in someone else's narrative. I was not ready to hand it over. My 25th birthday arrived in March. Sandra had been planning the dinner for 2 months. She reserved a private room at Aldridge, the nicest restaurant in Crestwood, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a sommelier who spoke in a low voice, and a prix fixe menu that changed seasonally. 32 guests, family friends, neighbors, a few of my friends from college. A centerpiece Sandra had custom ordered from a florist in Cleveland. It was a beautiful party. That was never in question. What was in question, what I had been quietly managing for weeks, was the reservation I had made separately. A table in the main dining room for 5. Ruth, Bernard, Abena, Kofi, Amara. I did not tell Sandra. I had thought about telling her. I had rehearsed it. I had imagined every version of the conversation. But every version ended the same way, with Sandra in the center of it, with my birth family becoming a problem Sandra needed to solve, rather than people I loved and wanted near me on my birthday. So I made 2 reservations, one for the party I was expected at, one for the people who had shown up in my life without expectation. I arrived at Aldridge at 6. The private room was perfect, of course. Flowers, candles, a small gifts table near the window. Sandra had arranged everything with her usual precision. She hugged me at the door. Glenn shook my hand the way he always did, firm, brief, correct. I smiled. I thanked them. I took my seat. For the first hour, everything was fine. Wine was poured, appetizers circulated. Glenn's business partner told a long story about a golf trip that nobody asked for, but everyone politely endured. My college roommate Maya sat beside me and made quiet commentary under her breath about the centerpiece, which did look slightly like a funeral arrangement if you stared at it long enough. Normal. Warm, even. The kind of evening that could have ended simply and well. Then Sandra stood up. She tapped her wine glass with a small silver knife. The room quieted immediately because Sandra had a way of commanding rooms that was less about volume and more about certainty. People stopped talking around her the way water stops around stone. She smiled at me. A long, practiced smile. She said that 25 years was a milestone. She said that she and Glenn had given everything they had to raising me. She said that love sometimes required difficult decisions, and that every decision they ever made had been made out of love. I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. Not from the words, from the way she was building toward something. Sandra set her wine glass down. She looked at me directly, and then she said that she had recently become aware that I had been spending time with certain people without informing the family, that I had been keeping secrets, that trust, once broken, was difficult to rebuild, that she and Glenn had discussed it and felt that until I was willing to be honest and prioritize my family the way a daughter should, they needed to take a step back from the relationship. 32 people heard it. Nobody moved. I sat very still. The way I had learned to sit still when Sandra was performing, the way you sit when you know that any reaction you give will be incorporated into the story she is already writing. Glenn was looking at the tablecloth. Maya's hand found mine under the table. Sandra folded her hands in front of her. She was not finished. She said that she had always tried to give me everything. She said that my choices lately reflected a lack of gratitude that she found painful. She said she hoped I would take time to reflect on what family actually meant. Then she sat down. 32 people exhaled. I looked at my water glass, picked it up, set it back down. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Then I looked up, past Sandra, past Glenn, past the white tablecloths and the candles and the custom centerpiece from the florist in Cleveland. Through the glass partition that separated the private room from the main dining room, 3 tables back, Ruth Okafor was already looking at me. She had seen everything. I want to ask you something before I go further. Have you ever sat in a room full of people and felt completely alone, and then looked up and found the one person who actually saw you? Tell me in the comments, because that is the only way I know how to describe what happened when my eyes found Ruth's through that glass. She did not stand up. She did not gesture. She did not perform concern. She simply held my gaze with the particular steadiness of a woman who had been waiting for 9 years and was prepared to wait longer if that was what I needed. Bernard put his hand over hers on the table. Amara was looking at her plate. Kofi was looking at me. The table in the private room had resumed a fragile, careful conversation, the way people resume conversation after witnessing something they are not sure how to process. Someone laughed too loudly about something unrelated. Glenn refilled his wine glass. Sandra accepted quiet murmurs of support from the neighbor beside her. Maya leaned close to my ear. "Are you okay?" I nodded once, then I stood up. Not dramatically, not quickly, the way you stand when you have made a decision and you are not asking anyone's permission. I pushed my chair back, set my napkin on the table, and walked out of the private room into the main dining room. 32 people watched me go. I crossed the restaurant in 12 steps. Ruth was already turning in her chair when I reached the table. I did not say anything elegant. I did not have a prepared speech. I pulled out the empty chair beside her and sat down, and she put both arms around me, and I let her. And for approximately 45 seconds, I was 23 years old and sitting on the floor of my Columbus apartment staring at a name I did not yet know how to say out loud. Then I sat up and looked at the table. At Ruth, Bernard, Abina, Kofi, Amara, whose eyes were slightly red around the edges. "Happy birthday," Ruth said quietly. I laughed. The kind of laugh that comes out when the alternative is something harder. "Thank you for being here," I said. She squeezed my hand once. We were not going anywhere. Behind me, through the glass partition, I could see the private room. Sandra had gone very still. Glenn was leaning toward her, speaking quietly. Several guests had noticed where I had gone. I could see the recalculation happening in real time. The guest who had witnessed what Sandra said. The guest now watching where I had chosen to sit. The math of the evening assembling itself into a different answer than the one Sandra had intended. Maya appeared in the doorway of the private room. She looked at me. I nodded once. She walked across the restaurant and sat down in the remaining empty chair at Ruth's table without being asked. Abina immediately offered her the bread basket. Maya took a roll and turned to Kofi and asked what he was studying. The table absorbed her in 30 seconds. That was the kind of family Ruth had built. I stayed at that table for an hour. Ruth and I did not talk about Sandra. We talked about Amara's school project, about Bernard's current clock restoration, about a hiking trail Kofi wanted all of us to try in the spring. Abina told a story about a cooking disaster that had Amara hiding her face in her hands. I laughed until my ribs hurt. At some point, Glenn appeared at the edge of the main dining room. He stood there for a moment looking at the table. At Ruth, who met his eyes without flinching. At me. Then he looked down and walked back toward the private room. I did not follow him. Near the end of the evening, a server brought a small cake to the table. Single candle. Ruth must have arranged it when she made the reservation. She had thought of it 2 weeks in advance, before she knew whether the evening would go well or badly, before she knew what Sandra would say or whether I would need somewhere to go. She had simply planned for the possibility that I might. That is the kind of woman she was. I closed my eyes and made a wish and blew out the candle and did not tell anyone what I wished for, because some things you keep for yourself. Sandra did not come to the table that evening. The party in the private room ended sometime after 9. I heard the guests leaving through the front entrance while I was still sitting with Ruth. I heard Glenn's voice near the coat check. I heard Sandra's silence, which was its own kind of sound. I drove home alone after midnight. My apartment was quiet. I sat on the same floor where I had first found Ruth's name in a database 3 years earlier, and looked at the wall for a long time. I did not feel victorious. I want to be honest about that. When the people who raised you choose a story about themselves over the truth about you, there is no version of the evening that feels like winning. There is only the particular exhaustion of finally stopping the performance. Sandra called the next morning. Her voice was controlled. It had always been controlled. She said she was disappointed in how I had behaved. She said she had been humiliated in front of people she respected. She said that my choices showed a fundamental lack of loyalty to the family that had given me everything. I let her finish. Then I said one thing. Sandra, you announced in front of 32 people that you were stepping back from our relationship because I had been spending time with people you didn't know about. You said that in a restaurant where those exact people were sitting 3 tables away. They heard everything you said. And then they stayed. Silence, I continued. I have spent my entire life trying to fit inside the version of me you were comfortable with. I am done doing that. Ruth is my birth mother. Her family is my family. I am not asking for your permission, and I am not apologizing for it. Sandra said, so that's it then. I said, that depends entirely on you. She hung up. Glenn called 3 days later. Shorter conversation, quieter. He said he understood more than Sandra did about complicated situations. He said he was sorry for how the evening went. He said he needed time. I told him time was fine. Time was available. What was not available was silence about who I was. He said that was fair. I believed him. Over the following months, the shape of things rearranged itself the way shapes do when you stop forcing them. Sandra and I did not speak for 4 months. When she called again, her voice had changed slightly. Not fully. Not in the ways that would require her to say the hardest things out loud. But enough. She asked how I was. She asked about my work. She did not ask about Ruth, and I did not offer. We were building something new and smaller than what we had, which was perhaps more honest than the large, carefully arranged thing we had before. Glenn came to Dayton with me once in the fall. He sat at Ruth's kitchen table and Bernard made coffee, and nobody said anything important for the first 30 minutes. Then Glenn asked Bernard about the clock on the mantel, and Bernard explained the mechanism, and Glenn listened the way engineers listen, precisely, genuinely, and something loosened in the room that I had not realized was tight. Kofi is in his final year of architecture school now. He designed a small addition to Ruth's house as a class project, and she is actually building it. Amara just turned 22. She has my laugh and Ruth's patience, and she texts me memes at hours that suggest she has no concept of time zones. Maya was maid of honor at my wedding last spring. Ruth sat in the front row. Sandra sat 4 rows back. She wore lavender, and she cried twice that I saw. Not theatrical crying, small, private tears that she did not perform for anyone. I saw her wipe them away quickly when she thought no one was looking. I was looking. I don't know exactly what she was crying about. Maybe the wedding, maybe the years, maybe finally seeing clearly what she almost destroyed the night she stood up at my birthday dinner and handed me a choice she thought was a threat. She didn't know it was a door. I have a question for you. If someone in your life tried to use your birthday as a weapon and it ended up setting you free, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. I am 31 years old. I have a husband who thinks I hung the moon. I have a birth mother who planned a birthday cake for me before she knew whether she would get to give it to me. I have a sister who laughs like me, and a brother who designs buildings, and a grandmother who calls me every Sunday without fail. I also have 2 people in Crestwood, Ohio who are learning, slowly, at the pace people learn things when they have spent their whole lives being certain that love does not require control to survive. And I have the memory of walking across a restaurant on my 25th birthday toward a table where no one had arranged anything perfectly, where things were simply real. That is where I have lived ever since. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear that the family who shows up for you is not always the family that raised you. And sometimes the most important walk you ever take is the one where you cross the room toward the people who were already waiting. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you in the next one.